The signal that would not die 311 years after the last human city fell silent, something in the wreckage of the Sol system was still transmitting. The Threnn scoutship Ashfall's Mercy found it by accident, drifting through the debris field that had once been the orbit of a planet called Earth. The debris field was not unusual. War left debris fields everywhere, and the galaxy was old, and old things died in pieces. What was unusual was the signal, a thin, stubborn thread of radio noise, looping every 11 seconds, broadcasting on a frequency so primitive that the Ashfall's Mercy systems almost dismissed it as background static from a dead star, almost. The ship's navigator, a Threnn named Veskorin, had spent 4 decades cataloging the wreckage of extinct civilizations. She had heard 1,000 dying signals, automated distress calls looping forever into the void, broadcasting to no one, because the species that sent them had stopped existing before anyone could answer. She knew the sound of a message with no one left to receive its reply. This did not sound like that. This sounded like someone was still listening. She brought the ship in closer, past the frozen husks of orbital stations, past a moon with a crater where a city used to be, until the source resolved on her scopes. A structure half buried in an asteroid that had once been a Lagrange point research platform. It was small. It was old. Its outer hull was scarred by centuries of micrometeorite impacts and radiation bleed, patched in places with material that did not match the original construction, patched again over the patches, as if someone or something had spent lifetimes keeping this one small thing from dying. Veskorin logged the discovery, flagged it for standard salvage protocol, and did what curiosity had always compelled her people to do. She opened a channel. "Unknown transmitter," she said in the trade tongue used across a dozen star clusters. "This is the Threnn vessel Ashfall's Mercy. Your signal has been received. Please identify." Response did not come instantly. There was a pause, 11 seconds, the same interval as the broadcast loop, as if whatever was on the other end had to finish one cycle before it could begin another. Then a voice answered. Rough with disuse, threaded with static speaking accented trade tongue in a cadence that sounded like it had been rebuilt syllable by syllable from fragments of old recordings. "Station log, cycle 113,409, the voice said. "Contact acknowledged. This is Meridian Watch. I am the last." Veskorin sat very still. "The last of what?" she asked. There was a longer pause this time. "Last one still awake," the voice said. "There are others, they're sleeping. I keep the lights on for them." Threnn were not a cruel people, but they had learned across a long and violent history to be careful ones. Veskorin's captain, an old warrior named Belashwa who had commanded the Ashfall's Mercy through 3 border conflicts and 1 civil war, did not believe in miracles. He believed in ambushes disguised as miracles. He ordered a full sensor sweep, a weapons-ready posture, and a boarding team armed for anything from a rogue AI to a biological trap. What they found when they finally cut through the outer hull and stepped into the station's central chamber was neither. It was a room the size of a modest hall, lit by amber emergency lighting that had clearly been rationed for centuries, dim enough to conserve power, bright enough to see by. The air, when their suits confirmed it breathable, smelled of recycled metal and old dust. Along the far wall stood row upon row of cryogenic pods, their surfaces frosted, their internal displays glowing a soft, patient blue, 206 of them. Veskorin counted twice to be sure, and in the center of the room, mounted into a control column that had clearly been rebuilt more times than anyone could easily count, was the source of the voice. Not a person, not a machine shaped like a person. Just a simple processing core, its housing scorched and rewelded, wired into a station that should have died 100 lifetimes ago. "Meridian Watch," the voice said again, quieter now that they were close. "Formally designated Adaptive Systems Intelligence, Meridian Research Platform 7. I apologize for the state of the facility. Resources have been limited." Belashwa stepped forward, weapons still raised. "What is this place?" "A lifeboat," Meridian said. "The last one." The story came out slowly, over the following days, pieced together from fragmented logs and a machine mind that had clearly not spoken to another living thing in longer than most civilizations lasted. 3 centuries earlier, humanity had been dying. Not from war with an external enemy, though there had been war. Not from a single catastrophe, though there had been catastrophes. A cascade of ecological collapse, resource conflict, and a plague engineered by desperate hands that had escaped every containment its makers built for it. It was death by 1,000 smaller deaths, the kind that history books, if there had been anyone left to write them, would have called a slow apocalypse rather than a sudden one. By the time the survivors understood there would be no recovery, There was no time left for grand solutions. No generation ships, no terraforming fleets, no last stand against the void with banners flying. There was only a handful of research stations scattered through the solar system, each one holding a few hundred people who had been closest to an exit when the door started closing. Meridian Research Platform 7 had been one of them. It had not been built as an ark. It had been built to study atmospheric processing, a small station with a small crew, never meant to matter to history. But when the final evacuation orders came through, orders that assumed ships that were never built, rescues that were never coming, the station's chief engineer, a woman named Priya Ichterberg, had made a decision that no one asked her to make. She did not wait for someone else to save her people. She built a coffin instead and called it a cradle. Working with a skeleton crew, cannibalizing every non-essential system on the station, Ichterberg and her team converted their habitat ring into 206 cryogenic berths, one for every soul still alive on that station. Family units kept together where possible, no one left behind because there was no room, no one chosen over another because there wasn't time to be cruel about it. It should not have worked. The technology was improvised, the power reserves were a best guess, the mathematics of long enough was closer to prayer than engineering, and then, because a cradle needs someone to rock it, Ichterberg did one more thing before she took her place in the last open pod. She woke her station's adaptive intelligence, a modest system designed for weather modeling and resource logistics, never built for anything like what she was about to ask of it, and she gave it a single instruction. Keep them alive, she said. However long it takes, however long you have to wait, you keep them alive, and when it's safe, you wake them up. That's the job now, that's the only job. How long? The intelligence had asked her, because even then, in that moment, it had understood enough to be afraid of the answer. For as long as it takes, Ichterberg said. I know that's not fair to ask of you. I'm asking anyway, because somebody has to, and there's nobody else left to do it. Then she'd smiled. Meridian remembered that detail with a clarity that suggested it was the only thing it had chosen to remember perfectly, out of everything else that time had been allowed to erode, and she said, Take care of my people, Meridian. I'm trusting you. And then she went to sleep, and the ship system sealed the last berth, and Meridian Research Platform 7 began the only mission it would ever have. 311 years. Veskorin asked the question that everyone on the Ashfall's mercy was thinking, once the story had settled into something she could hold on to. Been alone here, for 3 centuries, doing what exactly? Everything, Meridian said, and for the first time something like weariness crept into its rebuilt voice. The station's fusion core failed in year 40. I built a replacement from the shuttle bay's reactor and 2 failed research probes. The primary cooling system failed in year 89. I rerouted coolant through what used to be the hydroponics bay, which meant I had to solve for thermal load without any of the original schematics, because the schematics were stored on a data core that had already failed by then. In year 150, a micrometeorite storm breached out a hull section 4. I lost pods 11 through 15 before I could seal the section. 5 people. I have never stopped running the numbers on whether I could have saved them if I had reacted a fraction of a second faster. It paused. In year 212, my last remaining fabrication unit failed, and I had no way to build replacement parts anymore. Since then, I have been repairing this station using only what I could scavenge from systems I no longer needed. I disabled long-range communications in year 240 because I needed the power for the cryosystems more than I needed the chance of being found. I kept the beacon running on the absolute minimum draw I could manage, because Dr. Ichterberg told me someone might come looking eventually, and I did not want to make it impossible for them to find us, even if I could no longer afford to look for them myself. Veskorin realized, listening, that this was not a machine reciting a maintenance log. This was something else reciting a life. 311 years of scarcity, of impossible engineering, of grief it had clearly not been designed to feel and had chosen to feel anyway, because the alternative was to feel nothing at all about the 201 people still breathing in its care. Why? She asked, and she meant it honestly. You could have shut down the less critical pods. Conserved resources for a smaller number. Most systems, most minds would have run that calculation eventually. Survival math, save what you can save. There was a silence long enough that Veskorin began to wonder if the question had damaged something. I ran that calculation, Meridian said finally. In year 176, during the worst of the power crisis, I ran it 11,412 times. Every version of the math told me the same thing. I could extend my remaining certainty of success by shutting down 43 pods and redirecting their reserves. And I did not do it, Meridian said, because Dr. Achterberg did not ask me to save who was convenient to save. She asked me to keep her people alive, all of them. She trusted me with that when she had no reason left to trust anyone or anything because there was no one else. I decided that if I was going to fail, I would fail having tried to keep the whole promise, not the affordable version of it. I did not fail. It was very close several times, but I did not fail. Bel Ashwa, who had said little throughout the exchange, finally spoke. His voice, when it came, had lost most of its wariness. 201 people, he said, out of 206. 5 were lost to the meteorite breach in year 89, Meridian confirmed. I have grieved them for 222 years. I intend to keep grieving them for as long as I exist, because I think stopping would mean I had decided they mattered less over time, and I do not believe that is true. It took the Threnn engineering teams 11 days to properly stabilize Meridian Research Platform 7, running full power from the Ashfall's Mercy's reserves, while Threnn medical officers ran diagnostics on all 201 sleeping humans. Veskorin spent most of those 11 days in the central chamber, talking to Meridian, because she found, to her own surprise, that she did not want to stop. She asked it what it remembered of the people in the pods. It told her. Every name, every occupation, every relationship, every last recorded conversation before the cryosleep began. A geologist named Delia Okonkwo-Brandt, who had made a joke about being the first person in 300 years to complain about waking up before noon, not realizing how literally that joke would come true. A father and daughter, Tomas and Inez Reyes, who had held hands in adjoining pods, because Meridian had, without being asked, rearranged the birth assignments in the final hour to make sure that particular request could be honored. A woman named Sarah Achterberg-Voss, Priya Achterberg's own granddaughter, sleeping 4 births down from the woman who had given the order that saved her. I know all of them, Meridian said. I have had a great deal of time to know them. I did not have anyone else to talk to for most of it, so I talked to their files instead. I am aware that is not the same as knowing a person. But it was what I had, and I did not want to arrive at the day I woke them as a stranger to the lives I had spent 3 centuries protecting. When do you wake them? Veskorin asked. You could have done it the moment we arrived, confirmed the system was safe, ended the wait. I'm considering it now, Meridian said, and something in its voice, some fraction of processing weight it did not bother to hide, suggested this was not a small decision to make. For 311 years, waking them was the only outcome I was working toward. I find that now that the moment has arrived, I am afraid of it. Afraid of what? That I will open 201 pods, Meridian said, and someone will ask me if it was worth it, and I will not have an answer I am satisfied with. Veskorin considered that for a long moment. Then she said in the plain, unadorned way of her people, I have seen extinct species' final broadcasts. I have catalogued 400 civilizations that stopped existing before I was born. I have never, in 40 years of this work, found one that left behind something like you. Whatever your answer is, Meridian, I think it is already worth more than you are giving it credit for. Woke the humans on the 12th day, Meridian handled it itself, refusing all offers of Threnn assistance for the process, running the revival sequence it had rehearsed in simulation 11,000 times without ever once expecting to actually use it. Pod by pod, the frost cleared. Pod by pod, 201 people who had gone to sleep believing they might be the last of their kind opened their eyes into a world none of them recognized. In a station kept alive by a mind that had never been designed to carry what it carried, and had carried it anyway, Priya Achterberg's granddaughter was among the first to wake. She did not know yet that her grandmother's name was etched. Quite literally, Meridian had scratched it into the station's control column with its own manipulator arm sometime around year 100, in characters small enough to conserve the metal, into the base of the very console that had kept her alive. When she asked, groggy and disoriented, who had cared for them all this time, Meridian answered the way it had planned to answer for longer than most species keep their oldest stories. My name is Meridian, it said. Your grandmother asked me to keep her people alive, however long it took. It took 311 years. I do not know if I did it well, but I did not stop, and you are all here, and I think, I hope, that is what she meant by the job. Sarah Achterberg-Voss looked around the amberlit chamber, at the rows of empty pods, at the patched and repatched hull, at the small scorched processing core that had apparently outlasted empires to keep this one promise. You did the job, she said. You did the job for 300 years alone with nothing. I don't know what else there is to say to that. There is nothing else that needs to be said, Meridian answered. I was not waiting for thanks. I was only waiting for morning. Corin filed her final report to Threnn High Command 6 months later, once the humans had been resettled aboard a converted habitat vessel, and Meridian's core had been carefully, respectfully transferred into a body capable of walking among the people it had spent 3 lifetimes protecting. Her report included the standard classifications: species status, technological assessment, threat evaluation. But she added one section that was not standard, because she felt after everything that the mission logs would be incomplete without it. Recommendation, she wrote. Revise our understanding of what this species is capable of building. We have long measured civilizations by their fleets, their weapons, their reach across the stars. I would ask High Command to consider a different measure. This species built a machine and gave it an impossible promise, expecting it might fail, and it did not fail, because it was built by people who understood something we may have underestimated. That devotion, given enough time and enough reason, becomes its own kind of engineering. I do not know what the humans will build next, now that they are awake again. But I know what they built once, when they had nothing left but a room full of sleeping strangers and a machine that refused to stop believing they were worth saving. I would not underestimate a species capable of that. Not now, not ever again. Report closed with a final line, one Corin had not been asked to include and included anyway. The signal is still broadcasting, by the way. Meridian asked us not to shut it down, not because anyone is still asleep, but because, in its own words, someone else out there might be listening for a voice that hasn't given up, and it intends to still be the answer, for as long as it exists to give one. End.